Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Steve Speck and Mark Huelsing from EXO Mtn Gear to discuss their wild experiences and greatest lessons learned for planning your first Alaskan adventure. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. And today we've got the finale of our adventure series. We've talked about whitetail adventures, a handful of really cool ideas on that front. We last week talked about planning an epic western hunting adventure, and today we are going north to Alaska for the ultimate, the peak, the pinnacle of all hunting adventures, Alaska. How to plan your first Alaskan hunting adventure. It's something that so many of us dream of, so many of us want to do, but maybe have been intimidated by it or unsure of how to approach it, or maybe thought it was cost prohibitive. Many different obstacles stand in the way, I think, for those of us in the lower 48 when it comes to going to Alaska. But I have been super lucky over the last handful of years to get to go up there twice now. And what I've discovered is that to a large degree, it's way more possible than I ever realized. And so today we're going to talk to two people who've got even more experience than I do when it comes to planning these kinds of trips. And that is Steve Speck and Mark Huelsing from EXO Mtn Gear. And they came to mind for me as the right guys to talk about this because they just finished up a really cool project all about planning and executing and documenting epic Alaskan adventures. This is called their Experience Project. They, between the two of them and a handful of other buddies and folks they work with, did a 4-person caribou hunt in Alaska, then maybe 3-person, I can't remember how many guys did it, but a multi-person moose hunt in a different part of Alaska, and then 2 of them went and did a mountain goat hunt in Southeast Alaska. So they had this wide array of Alaskan hunting experiences. They filmed it all, created a terrific video series, but then they also broke down in detail everything they did to plan for the trips and then how the actual trips went. They've got gear reviews and discussions and strategy sessions and stories and all sorts of great stuff on their own feeds there and their website over at the Experience Project. So I'm not going to try to cover all that ground here today. Today, it's about high-level stuff. Me and Steve and Mark talk through everything from, why go to Alaska to who is an Alaskan hunt right for, how to tell if you're ready or not. We talk through costs and planning considerations. We talk about, should you go DIY or guided or use a transporter? We talk through a bunch of things about, preparing physically and mentally for this kind of adventure, what kind of conditions to be ready for, some of the key gear considerations, and a bunch more along those lines. This one for me was inspiring, exciting, and super informative, as I definitely am hoping to go back to Alaska and do more of this. So highly recommend this. If you ever hope to go to Alaska, listen to this episode. It will help you plan it, prepare for it, and it will definitely inspire you to stay up late at night daydreaming about the last frontier too. So that is the main gist of this episode. But we also have a little addendum that will be added to the end of this, kind of a part 2 of the podcast, because if any of us want to be able to go to Alaska and have these incredible wild experiences in this incredible wild place, we need to make sure that Alaska stays incredible and wild and open and public and healthy. So there are thriving wildlife and fish populations and wild, open, public lands for us to go out there and experience them on. In Alaska, unfortunately, as I have been learning more and more here recently, is not as picture perfect and unthreatened as you might imagine. Sometimes I think in our imagination, we just assume that Alaska is way up there, far away, and it's safe from all the other threats that public lands down in the lower 48, are used to facing. But that's actually not the case. There's a number of controversial and potentially really significant projects up there and proposals up there that could impact our ability to have all those things I mentioned: thriving wildlife populations, wild and wide open public places, clean water, all that kind of stuff. So I've got my friend Bjorn Dila. He is a lifelong Alaskan resident, a diehard hunter, a conservationist, and an outdoor writer. He joins me at the end for a quick 15-minute-ish rundown of some of the very most important issues right now when it comes to Alaska and the future of Alaska and hunting and fishing opportunities. So be sure to listen to that one so that you know how you can be a part of a positive future for Alaska, so that each and every one of us has that chance to get up there someday, to enjoy it ourselves, hopefully our kids, and many more generations to come. So that's the game plan today, guys. It's going to be an absolute banger of an episode. I'm excited you're here with me. I'm excited to talk about Alaska, excited to dream about Alaska, and we should probably just get right to it. So here we go. All right, with me now, I've got Steve Speck and Mark Huelsing. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us on.
It's going to be fun.
I'm excited for this one, as I have personally been spending a lot of my kind of mental daydreaming time on Alaska over the last year. I got to spend about 2 weeks there last fall, and have already been planning a couple new expeditions probably for this year. So super excited about it. And this seemed like the perfect place to end this series that we've been doing over on Wired to Hunt this month, all about kind of adding adventure to your hunting season. We've talked about a bunch of whitetail ideas. We've talked about Western ideas, and there's no bigger, badder adventure than Alaska. And you guys, as I've been watching from afar, kind of took that to the next level, it seems like, with your experience project this year. So I got to ask straight out the gate, why Alaska from your perspective? Why? And I guess I'll let you, Steve, maybe kick it off.
Sure.
Why is the last frontier a little bit different than everything else? Why did you just have to go and start hunting there?
It's just like everything you want it to be for me. My first trip up there, I think, was in 2014, and it was actually a miserable experience in this swamp for moose, and just a terrible. But it's just like I call Alaska like heroin. It's like a drug that just freaking hooks you, you know. And it's just so like everything's heightened up there. So for Mark and I, adventure is everything. We're not like species specific, or we kind of coined our own phrase called experience hunters. It's kind of where the experience project came from, and that we're just chasing like adventure. Like, go dial up the adventure dial to 120%. Let's go do this. And so it's not about the animal as much as like what are the logistics of the hunt? How far are we hiking in there? What are we dealing with? Weather and mountains and brown bears. I mean, just whatever. So that's what Alaska represents. In Idaho, I've been living here for 39 of my 40 years, and have had some amazing experiences, and you can get away from people. Closest thing down here is like the Frank Church Wilderness, which you can go into and just kind of have this feeling of isolation. Everything's just heightened. It's not like you're not like 2 miles from your truck where you have that kind of safety out if you need it. You really got to, you got to train, you got to be ready, you got to have your gear dialed in. And Alaska is just kind of the pinnacle of all that for me. And so once I started hunting, I was like, I got to figure out a way to get up there at least once a year. After my first trip up there. So,
what about you, Mark?
I think, like we were talking about before we recorded, like there's this idea that Alaska is untouchable in a way, right? Like we all dream of it, and it's this big grand adventure. I was able to go for the first time in 2019 with Steve and a group of guys, and we did a pretty typical fly-in drop camp caribou hunt. And it was like flying commercially up to Alaska. One was way easier than I expected. But then two, I remember that as soon as we got in the float plane, I was sitting up front with the pilot, a couple guys in the back. And I'm like looking at this plane, and there's pieces missing out of the dash and like wires hanging down. And I'm like, is this literally what we're taking?
It was a little unnerving.
And yeah, it was like the first time that I got nervous about this whole thing. And then just the flight in. I mean, I remember flying in and thinking, okay, like we could turn around and go home now. That was worth it. Like just the experience of seeing Alaska, being part of what is such a different way of life in a way up there. I mean, I could tell a bunch of stories. We basically stole some guy's truck this year. Like, it's just the people, the culture, yes, the hunting, of course, but like the land. I mean, it's just such a wild place. And as soon as I did it once, like Steve said, it's a little bit like heroin, where it's like, okay, how do I get back up here? Like, how do I do that again? Like, it doesn't. I've been fortunate enough to hunt a bunch of different species and parts of Alaska, which has been cool, because we all talk about Alaska, but there's so much variety, which is another thing. It's like, from southeast to the far north and interior and coastal and peninsula, it's like there is just so much to experience and explore. And it doesn't have to be as difficult or as expensive as you think. I mean, it's not cheap, but you don't have to spend 10 plus grand to do something. And then once you taste it, it literally is a little bit like a drug, for sure.
Yeah. It was so eye-opening for me this year. I've done 2 separate trips to Alaska myself. The first one was kind of set up by, I went with Steve and a bunch of guys from MeatEater, so they did a lot of the logistics, and I was just kind of there. But this last time around, I was much more involved in figuring it all out myself. And that, to your point, Mark, was this aha moment for me that, little old me could do this. And it was no more expensive to fly to Alaska than it was to like take a trip to Florida or California or something.
Right.
And I'd hell of a lot prefer going to Alaska than one of those spots. So yeah, it was a big eye opener for me this past year. But I do think there's this other thing that a lot of folks wonder about. There's the cost question. But then there's a certain degree of like experience or skill barrier that I think a lot of people maybe look at. And so that leads me to this next major question that I think a lot of people ask, which is, am I ready for this? Or am I right for this? Am I qualified for this? How would you guys go about recommending someone think about whether Alaska is right for them or not, or if they are ready or not? How do you think about that, Steve?
That's a tough one. Yeah, we were just in Salt Lake at the Hunt Expo, and I had a dad and his son come up, and he was wanting to, like, hey, can you like tell me about your caribou hunt? And give me all the logistics. And then the more I talked to him, I was like, you're not ready for this. Like, it's that has a lot of logistics and a lot of just you got to be really dialed with your gear. I mean, there's just a lot going on there. It's probably too much to chew. I think my first hunt out there was a moose hunt, and even that was quite a bit. And then after doing that and then doing a caribou hunt, because a lot of people will have the mindset, well, I'm just going to go to Alaska once, and so I'm going to hunt the most preferred species. And I think doing something that's a little bit easier to chew is probably a good start. So like a drop camp caribou hunt is a fairly easier hunt than like a moose hunt with all the logistics of getting all the meat home and just packing that and dealing with Alaska. So I do think you need to just evaluate where your skill set is, as far as if all you've been doing is whitetail hunting your whole life and you've never backpacked, I'd probably, drive out to Colorado and backpack elk hunt. I mean, you would want to kind of take it in steps. I think weather is certainly a big issue up there in Alaska, down here, and even in Idaho, we're pretty casual about stuff like bivy sacks and tarps when we're backpacking. Up there, it's like you better have a 4-season tent. You better be. That's the first time I ever spent more than like 24 hours in a tent. Our first caribou trip up there, you had like 48 hours stuck inside a little tent because it's 60-mile-an-hour winds, right? Like, you don't experience that stuff in the lower 48. But if you came from never backpacking to going full into that, I think it's a lot to take. Sure, certainly some guys can do it, and you're gonna learn fast. But it's, if you have no experience, caribou hunt, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think a drop camp caribou hunt is a great introduction. Some of the Kodiak stuff is a great introduction. I'm sure we're talking with obviously a lot of deer hunters and Sitka blacktails. It can be miserable and difficult at times, but it's also very doable, whether that's boat-based or lodge-based. It's a little bit different, obviously, if you like fly in early and get dropped off up high and you're out on your own. So yeah, some of those hunts where it's whether it's transportation, like it's a drop camp hunt, or it's this boat-based hunt, and you have this ability to, like, say on a drop camp hunt, either have like a pretty solid base camp to return to, because essentially you're just day hunting from there, or on a boat based or lodge based like Kodiak deer hunt, you have this place to retreat to. Like, you may go out and you may be very difficult day hunting, you may get soaking wet, you may be freezing cold, but you kind of have this place to return to. It isn't home, but at least it's something, versus obviously like a true backpack hunt where you're just like, hey, it's me and just what's on my back for 7 to 10 days. Like, that's just a different level of risk and skill and what have you. So I would say there's, like, it's all difficult in its own way, and that's one thing to just like anticipate with Alaska. And as we're talking about like this theme of adventure wouldn't be adventurous if it all went well, right? Like, so you have to expect, like, and part of what I'm signing up for with Alaska in particular, and with this idea of like chasing the next level of adventure, is getting outside of my comfort zone. Otherwise it wouldn't be adventurous, right? So like Steve was saying, like, stuck in a tent for hours and hours, gear failures I've never seen, like a mental like grind that I've never experienced. Like, all that stuff has happened in Alaska at a different level, but that's also what makes it amazing, It's been cool, I think, for me to look at like some of the hunts I've done in Alaska, and like, to your point of am I ready or not, it's been neat for me to realize I wasn't ready to do certain things, but like over the experience of years, I've built some skill sets, confidence, experiences that made me ready. And it's cool to look back and go, man, I literally could not have done this 10 years ago. Whether it was knowledge, whether it was mindset, whether it was, physical capability, whatever, but it's really rewarding to like just kind of push outside that comfort zone. And again, like, that's the entire point of adventure from my perspective.
Yeah. So you bring up a great point, which is, you can get ready for this. This isn't something that you're just like born Alaska ready or not.
Sure.
Steve, you alluded to, hey, maybe drive out to Colorado and do some elk hunting or something for a while.
Yeah.
Are there any other things you'd recommend, or do you want to expand on that a little bit? If there's someone listening to this that says, hey man, Alaska is on the list, I want to do it someday, but I recognize I'm not quite there yet. I've been a lifelong Midwest hunter or whatever. Can you expand a little bit on things that they can do to build that skill set and readiness level, so that maybe in 5 years or 10 years or however many years it is, they could do what we're talking about? Steve, do you want to lead on that?
I mean, number one's going to be mental toughness. So I think you're going to, certainly, I mean, Alaska is obviously a huge state, and there's a million different opportunities and things that could be thrown at you. You could have a very easy hunt, or you could have extremely difficult, challenging hunts. I would say on the average, they're going to be more physical. They're going to take more mental toughness. You're going to deal with more adversity. So just prepping your body for your body and your mind for dealing with those things is something that, we talk about, Mark and I talk about a lot in our podcast, try to do episodes with how do you build mental toughness. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's kind of a slow growth thing, and could be as simple as, waking up every morning at 5 a.m. and going for a run and just starting to deal with like, I don't want to do that, but I'm going to do it. Or, anything just that you don't want to do. We do a thing every year called the death hike, where we just pick a ridiculous distance that we go hike, and we got to train for it. And that, it's like, I don't want to overhype it, but what that's done for myself over the last 10 years of doing it is pretty incredible. Just pushing past, like, I didn't think I could hike 100 miles in 3 days. I don't even think that was possible, but yeah, it is. You just train for it and, block out what the brain's telling you in between your ears, this sucks. And, you need to take some very practical steps. If you've never backpacked, just walk out in your backyard and go. If that's the very first night, just go camp out in your backyard for a night, blow up your mattress, sleep in there, go out there when it's, snowing or raining and cold, and not just when it's convenient, because that's when it's, you're not going to get to pick the weather when you're in Alaska. So just little baby steps, and it won't take long, I think, just to get there. Certainly physical trainings, the hunts can be very physical. We've done some, Mark's very first hunt we killed your caribou 8 or 9 miles from our base camp.
Yeah.
And walking across that tundra stuff was absolutely miserable. But you didn't have to do that. The caribou numbers were low, and we're like, well, we better go find them. Some guys are very successful on those hunts, just hunting right around camp and waiting for caribou to come by. I don't know, Mark, any other practical steps? I think it's just, Like everything,
I would say,
you got to start somewhere and baby steps, and pretty quickly you get there, whether it's a year or 5 years. Yeah.
yeah, where my head went was like everything you said, Steve, is relevant, like true. My head also goes immediately to making sure that the people you're potentially going to do this Alaska trip are
Sure.
also on that same page and that same journey.
Great point.
So like if you're doing that, say it's like you and a buddy, or you and, your brother, whatever, like do that together. Even when I'm saying that, yes, the hunt, obviously that's like what you're doing, but all that training stuff, all the, weird hours, tired stuff. I have a friend at home who's not hunted Alaska, but he talks with me about hunting and stuff, and he's turning 33 here in a few weeks. And he sent me a text the other day. I was like, "Hey man, I'm getting together a group of guys. I want to hike 33 miles for my 33rd birthday as fast as possible, and we're starting at 1 a.m. It's like, sign me up. I'll be there." Like, but those are the types of things that if you never make that decision to be like, hey, how fast can I hike 33 miles? Like, what would it be like to hike when I'm tired and do it at 1 a.m. and that type of thing? Like, that's a like fresh in my mind example of if I was planning an Alaska trip with a couple of buddies, like that's the type of thing I would do. And that may sound really weird, but you don't know, like you could have grown up with someone, but people change under adversity and like difficult situations and lack of sleep and physical exhaustion and whatever. And one thing that's cool, like with some of the guys and trips we've done with Alaska, is like, those people, like, like what they're made of, and essentially like when they're squeezed, what comes out of them. And there's nothing like that. But that's also like to the point of you also don't know what you're like. So you learn a lot about yourself too by doing that type of thing.
Yeah. So a lot of this, I think, in preparing your body and mind for this kind of trip, and then also enjoying the trip, I think, comes down to expectations.
Yeah.
Both, knowing what to expect, but then also properly setting, expectations around the experience or your goals or whatever too. I mean, so much of our, at least I can only speak for myself, but so often I find that my hunts are colored by the goals I come into the trip with. If I go into it and if I go in there like, I got to kill a mature buck or whatever, I end up, sometimes having a totally different experience than if I went into it with what you guys described being like experience seekers, just going into like, man, I want to have an adventure and I want to see what's out here and see what happens and push myself and enjoy every different crazy thing that happens. How would you recommend someone, or how have you guys gone into these trips and figured out how to properly set expectations and goals? Because I think a lot of people will go into this kind of like you said, like, this is my one-time trip. I'm going to Alaska. I got to kill the trophy moose, or I got to kill the trophy sheep, or the trophy bear, or whatever the thing is. And that maybe that's setting yourself up for failure. Maybe not. But what do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah. What, Mark, I'm thinking of how lucky are we? That's what popped in my mind, right? We were, one of our hikes last year, we're dropping into the Grand Canyon, and I'm just like, it's sunrise, and I'm looking around. I look at Mark, like, man, how lucky are we? Like, we're alive, we're healthy, we're about ready to do 100 miles here into the Grand Canyon. Like, it's all mindset, right? You just have to have a positive attitude. I know that very first Alaska moose trip I talked about, like, I had never done a hunt where I wasn't in control of basically my transportation, I guess. Like, plane dropped you off and you're out there, and everything in Idaho or anything I'd done in other states surrounding Idaho was like, all right, I'm done with the hunt. I hike out, I get to my truck, I drive away. And I was like an old rotten 5-year-old, like, what do you mean you can't come pick us up? We're done hunting. And that was a whole new perspective of just like, you got to kind of embrace Alaska. Things move at their speed. I don't know. I mean, you just got to stop and smell the roses, I guess is the best thing I can say. When you're like, hey, I'm in Alaska, it's going to be an amazing experience, and just set that expectation that stuff's going to happen. Not everything's going to go right. I always tell people, plan on one day up front and one day in the back end of weather. Like, that's a guaranteed thing to happen. I'd say on the average, it's probably true. Sometimes we get super lucky, get up there, beautiful weather, get flown in, get the day you're supposed to, get picked up the day you're supposed to. Other times you sit there. I mean, the moose hunt we did last year, we sat for basically an extra 72 hours in a camp at the edge of this lake waiting for the plane to come back because the winds are too big and causing waves on the lake. And it's just, you just gotta I could be sitting at a desk in the office, there's worse places to be. But I think setting that expectation of, there was a guy on another hunt. We were on a sheep hunt in 2022, and he was a principal, and he had to be back. Like he only had so many days off of work, and he had to be back, or it was like, all hell broke loose on that day. And I was like, dude, I would not book this trip. He got out. He got really lucky. Like we were stuck in this camp waiting for the weather to clear, and luckily the guy got out of there. But it was don't put yourself in that position. Like always tell the wife and kids, like, hey, add a couple days at the end of the trip.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Because if you put you're on Alaska time once you're up there, and if you have these like very hard constraints on when getting up there is one thing, but getting back out is obviously the one that matters the most. And so that's definitely a good tip of plan for that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just in all of life, just how lucky are we? Like, just put a smile on your face. You're happy. Like, there's always problems. There's always stuff come up, but having a positive outlook can drastically change. I mean, I know Mark's same as me. Like, firm believer in positive attitude has positive outcomes, right? Like, if you're upbeat and like, yeah, we're gonna make this happen, or this is gonna be a fun experience. Generally, like when the bad things happen, you're just like, you brush them off. Versus if you're expecting a bad experience and the bad things happen, you go, I told you, this is going to suck. So your mind can be a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah.
So true.
I remember speaking with Billy Malls. He's like a Alaska guide. Been doing it a long time. I think we were speaking with him before my first trip, Steve, before the 2019 caribou hunt on our podcast. And he basically was talking about how like the worst hunting experiences or the worst like outcomes, I guess, that his hunters have had is all because they've been focused on like the trophy, the success, the results. And whether they did or didn't fill a tag, they ultimately missed the experience of hunting Alaska because they were just focused on like, especially too with Alaska, like whether it's, something on the more affordable side or you do save up for years and then it's like hunting sheep. Like wherever you're at on that spectrum, there is like this, I've been dreaming about this forever. I've been saving for this. I'm spending good money. I better come back home, with like my tag filled. Like that pressure I think is more natural to Alaska, that mindset, but it's a real danger to like missing why you're doing it. So there's a balance of like stop and smell the roses. At the same time, like Steve just talked about all that positive mindset and enjoy the experience stuff. He is like stone cold set on like, no, we will be successful, period. Right. So it's in the process, like embrace every aspect of it, embrace the adventure, but never lose sight of like you are there for a mission, because also that like relentless attitude of expecting success is what creates success when stuff gets bad. Like I had a mountain goat hunt up there, and we essentially had it was either 8 or 9 days. And in the area and who I was hunting with, like it's pretty much like expected to fill your tag. Like whether the quality of the billy is or whatever, we'll see. When people don't fill their tag on the hunt with this outfitter, he says like it's generally because people quit. It's not because they didn't get an opportunity. It's because they quit because it's too difficult to stick it out. So anyway, long story short, we're going into like the last night of this 8-9 day hunt. I hadn't had a shot opportunity. We have to be out of the field tomorrow. And we're like way up on the mountain, low visibility, you can't see a thing. So I had to wrestle with that whole reality of like, what is it like to go on a hunt that I've been truly wanting to do for many, many years, and that was not cheap. And now I'm going to bed knowing we're hiking out of here tomorrow. Like, I had to wrestle with that. And what is that like to go do this experience, to bring other people with me, to have talked about it publicly, to, have money on the line and all that stuff and not fill a tag. And it was definitely like a mental process to come to peace with it. And I don't know what it would have been like to wrestle with that afterwards, because I ultimately filled my tag the next day, which was wild. But I truly didn't expect to. So I was like going through that. Like I hadn't given up hope, but like in all reality of basically just hunting in the morning and that's it. So I get the whole pressure of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But But again, like, why are you doing this? It's hopefully not for social media. It's hopefully not to say you've killed a, bear, buck, bull, sheep, ram, whatever. It's hopefully for the experience of it, for the adventure of it, to have gone to Alaska and like met nature at a different level, essentially. Like, hopefully that's your why.
Yeah. Kind of continue down this line with expectations. I think and this is even something I feel like one of you mentioned in one of your episodes this past fall, but there's this very hard to picture difference between what you imagine it being like when you're looking at the maps and when you're researching and you're like, oh man, well, it's only 3/4 of a mile from this spot to this spot, or this is only 1,000 feet from this spot to this spot. It's often very hard to actually translate from at home to what it's actually going to be like there in the field. And for people who've never been there, who've never done this before, it's especially hard. Even for people that have experience, doing Western hunts and stuff. I mean, it's as you said, it's different. You guys this past fall were on caribou hunts, moose hunt, and a mountain goat hunt from across some pretty wildly different terrain, right? Low river bottom stuff there for your moose hunt, Steve. And then I saw, Mark, you were up there chasing the goats way up high in the Alpine. You guys were kind of in that tundra mountain kind of meeting ground there for your caribou hunt. You saw some wildly different Alaskan experiences. Can you paint a picture for me a little bit, or for our audience, a little bit of kind of as best as you can, what folks should be prepared to experience when they get there, when it comes to this wildly different terrain, habitat, and experience on the ground? Because this isn't like walking on the back 40 to go sit in a tree stand in Missouri. This is pretty different. Could you guys take some turns just kind of walking through like what it's actually like there on the ground in some of these places?
Yeah. You mean like from a physical effort standpoint to navigate the country? Or
from a physical standpoint, but then it actually literally, like, what are you having to slog through? What's it like to slog across the tundra, tussocks, or pushing through alder thickets, or climbing up to where you found that mountain goat, Mark? That I think people could use a little bit of color to really truly understand what that looks like and what that feels like.
Yeah, miserable. Or amazing, depending on how you want to look at it. It's certainly like whenever I'm done with almost any Alaska hunt, I'm just like, I can't wait to get back to Idaho and just be on dirt and rocks, because everything like
and a trail
ground. Yeah, and a trail. Like there's no trails. It's tough going on our moose hunt. We're hiking year round stuff. I'm always designing, testing prototypes, and I can basically hike at like 3.5 to 4 miles an hour with a weighted pack on trail. It's like, okay, 4 miles. If I'm cruising, I can do that in an hour. You get up to Alaska, like that's all just gone. Yeah, even so, when I'm in Idaho, if I'm planning a backpacking route, right, like I'm going to hike this trail, go up this finger ridge that comes down, I can look at it and get a pretty good idea of, maybe 20 minutes a mile, maybe 30 minutes a mile. If I'm planning in, say like, all right, I need to leave Boise at this time so I can get to the trailhead and I can get to where I want to camp and glass by dark. I can, I got a pretty good idea. You get to Alaska, you just throw that out the window. Like, we were on the moose hunt in particular. We got dropped off at a lake, and we're going to hike between 2 and 5 miles up this kind of marshy bottom. There's a river going through it, and then we're like, well, it looks like there's some hills to the side of the river that we can get up in and probably get out of the marshy stuff. That should be easier walking. And you get there, and it's like, okay, never mind. The hill is like neck deep brush. Like that's not happening. So you're just literally. Something that I'm sure a lot of listeners could equate to would be duck hunting or something like that. You're knee deep in muck with a 90-pound pack on. It was hours to get like a mile. We were moving camp on the second day, and it's like we're looking at it, and it's like, okay, that's going to take a while. And I pull up Onyx. It's like, oh, that's 800 yards. I'm like, that could take 2 hours to just cover that 800 yards. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And we move through the country faster than most. So it's definitely, I don't want to like harp on physical conditioning and being ready for that stuff. I don't want to scare people away from it. But if you're not ready, if you're saving for multiple years, this is, it's like, this is your, like, your budget only allows to do this one hunt, this one time. don't let your physical ability set you back. So definitely take training very, very serious. And you may not need it, but worst case, you're just in better shape. But generally, every hunt I've done, it's going to be like physical condition is a huge part of it. That's what Mark was saying on the mountain goat hunts. So the number one reason people aren't successful is they quit, right? Like they just get tired and they throw in the towel. So it can be very, very physically demanding. But like I think if you're from like Oregon or Washington, like hunting Roosevelt elk, you're used to hunting really brushy country. You don't get that in Idaho, where it's just a sea of alder brush and stuff up there. That it's just a whole nother level. Yeah. The first caribou hunt we did that Mark was talking about, like walking through 8 miles of the Tussock's tundra stuff, it's so freaking miserable. Where the ground is, you got like 18-inch just humps and heaves everywhere, and you don't know if you're gonna fall into them or not. It's I don't know how to put it in perspective. I mean, if you went out to Idaho and did a really tough backpack hunt, I've hunted every square inch of this state pretty much. Everything I've done in Alaska is exponentially harder than what I've done here, and this is a rough, rugged state here in Idaho.
Yeah. That first caribou hunt, the first full like hunting day we had, there was 6 of us on that trip, Steve.
That's great.
And 6 and then so Justin was filming. We had 7 guys, 6 tags, but we were all on this hillside, and we had killed one bull, and then we spot these caribou, just a few of them, like across the basin. And so like line of sight, I want to say it was like 1.3 miles or something. So we make this plan where it's like, all right, these 3 guys are going to stay where they're at, keep glassing. The other 3 guys plus Justin the cameraman, so 4 guys, we're going to cross. And so we're going to drop down and like cross the bottom and then come back up this other side. So I was in the group of guys crossing. So we drop, it's not a ton of elevation, but we drop, and then we get to the bottom, and there's a river bottom. And it looks like when you're sitting on the hillside looking at where the caribou were and where we're headed, it looks straightforward as all get out, right? You get down there and there's like this brush and these trees and all these super deep creek cuts you never saw. And then you're crossing the river and you're like taking waders on or putting waders on and then taking them off. And then as soon as you realize you took them off, you shouldn't have taken them off. You've got to put them back on. And like you're falling, you're sliding, you're stepping in holes. There's way more micro terrain than you expected, blah, 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 blah. So I'm doing all that with these guys. And ultimately at the end of the day, we caught up to these caribou, we killed the caribou. What I didn't know was all the other guys who sat back on that hillside were like watching us, waiting for us, and just going, what are they doing? Why are they going so slow? And it like became this joke of, they have no sense of urgency. Yeah. Like these caribou are right here and they have no sense of urgency. Meanwhile, we're down there like going as fast as we can, working as hard as we can. And I would say take, like as a rule of thumb, take what you think you're capable of in the lower 48 and at least half it. But like more often it's like a third, right? So if you're like, oh, I can hike 3 miles an hour where I hunt, it's probably like, if you're doing 1 mile an hour in a lot of areas of Alaska, like you're cruising. Yeah. So like perspective on like what you see, how much ground you can cover. We love the Onyx guys, but definitely have to give them trouble. Like, do you guys use a weird ratio for the Alaska maps? Because like nothing lines up, you know? So it's just deceiving for sure.
Yeah.
Different world up there.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to get a little more kind of clarity from you guys on, when thinking about someone planning their first trip like this, would be determining whether they should do guided or hire just a flight service to drop them in somewhere, or to try to do something totally DIY. And I know there's certain species you can't do DIY, right? So there's some stipulations there. But do you guys have any thoughts there for people as they're trying to make that decision? Because I think that's another big one. People, when they're looking at, I have a certain set of experience, but then I also have a budget, and you're trying to balance all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. Have you guys had any thoughts on that have changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I wouldn't do, if you're new to Alaska, I wouldn't do anything without knowing somebody who's done the hunt prior. Like have a friend, get on internet forums, get on Facebook. I don't know, just start asking questions and find somebody. Usually guys they did the hunt and they're willing to share like who they went or where they went or things like that because they're probably not going to go back. It's not like lower 48 where you're like very protective of this basin you hunted or something. I would highly, highly recommend, like some kind of personal connection to what you're doing up there versus, if you just find a, Google search some outfitter and do a drop camp or do a fully guided hunt. I mean, there's good ones and there's really bad ones. We hear the horror stories all the time. It's like I had a friend of ours booked a stone sheep hunt up in Canada. And, this is like a $70,000 hunt. It was absolutely insane. Gets up there and they hired the guide that was on him the day before the hunt. I'm sure whoever's supposed to be the guide quit or whatever, they're probably in a tough spot, but you're spending $70,000. The guy who's hunting your guide was hired the day before, never been in the country, no idea where the sheep are. So those types of things, that exists up there. Our first moose hunt we did at it was an air service place where you hire them, you don't really they just drop you off or they want to drop you off. They're shuttling hunters in and out. You can some of them, most of them have an option where they can provide the gear and food, or you can do it yourself. I always do it when I've done those hunts. I've always done it myself just so I can control. You don't know exactly what they're going to give you. But we were just cattle. They were just shuttling hunters in and out as fast as they could. They didn't care about your experience. It was a pretty miserable experience from that customer service side. So it's like, I'll never go with those guys again. But there are good ones. There's ones they don't overbook themselves. A lot of them will, they want to maximize their profits, right? So they're doing as many hunters as they can. Well, you get 2 or 3 days of bad weather. All of a sudden there's this domino effect and you're stuck out in the field because they've got 15 other groups of hunters and they're trying to prioritize who's getting out and not. And so those are the ones you want to do your best to avoid. And that's where, hey, reach out on wherever it is and talk to somebody like, I went with this company last year. They were great. Or no, I went with this company. They were, don't go with them. So that's that. I think that's probably your easiest first intro into Alaska is hiring one of those air service companies versus a total DIY thing. Just because they're, generally they're motivated to have you be successful. I mean, because they want happy customers to report back. Some of them don't care. Some of them get, there's so many people that want to do it. They can just have people have bad experiences and they're still booked up the next year, which is, just how it goes. I think it's a good intro point to get up there and do that. Like our caribou hunt was that. We've done that twice. The first moose hunt was a drop camp type hunt.
Yeah. The species you have to have a guide are sheep, mountain goat, brown bear. So those are just if people are new, like there's no other option other than fully guided. Obviously for species like moose, even caribou, you can do DIY, transporter, or fully guided. So you get into a lot of different options there. It is important to, like, this sounds like nuance, but it's important for people to understand, like a transporter is a transporter. They're not really tied to being able to offer you any sort of hunting services. So like a good example would be the place we've hunted in Kodiak Island. It's a lodge-based hunt. They are just a transporter. Like we're staying at their place. We get on their boat and they transport us, across the water to a place that we go hunt, fully self-guided, whatever. But that is important for people to understand, and like good questions to ask as well is they legally, like if we kill a buck and come back to the lodge, they legally can't do anything like with your deer. They will help like provide packaging, for example. But like just little nuances like that. Like if you start talking, it doesn't matter what the species is, but you start talking to like a transporter, and it's like, hey, what will and won't you help me with in terms of taking care of my game or getting it in or out of the field? Like they can do that as a transporter, but do they provide any place for you to say cut up a caribou or package caribou or do any of that stuff when you get back to the field? Like, so those are some of the nuanced things to look at. And then like Steve said, some of these drop camp services where it's like, hey, they provide a shelter, they provide food, whatever. I would ask questions on what that means. Like what type of shelter, what type of food. In general, they're going to drop you off with a giant Rubbermaid bin of Mountain House and like a bag of onions and a bag of potatoes or something. Like it may not be any food you actually want to eat for the whole week. So sometimes it looks like it's easier logistically of like, hey, I'm doing this all-in thing. They provide camp, they provide food, they provide whatever. I would really look at, is that worth the cost, and is it what you want? It may be much better to say, hey, I just want to fly it in here. I just want you to transport us, but I'm going to bring all my own gear and everything else. And then on that note, again, like a nitty gritty thing is ask questions, especially for a flight-based hunt, on what is the weight limit, and understanding if that's when you do or don't bring your own gear as well, because most of these flights are going to have like a very strict weight limit, and it's not a joke. Like your person stands on a scale. All of your gear and everything you're taking into the field will be put on a scale. And there's literally situations you could go in and they say, okay, for you guys, for this flight, you can have 1,000 pounds of gear. If you're at like 1,012 pounds, they're like, hey, take 12 pounds out. Like, so just little stuff like that. I mean, just to not be caught off guard on details like that. Like, those are the types of questions to ask and things to look at and things to understand.
Yeah, such a great point. You don't want to be there thousands of miles from home after you did all this work to get there and saved up all this money, and then find out that you can't take major chunks of important stuff you wanted to bring. Or I had a friend who just barely missed the cutoff for how heavy a person will take it all. So you gotta be aware of all that kind of stuff, I guess. So final kind of expectation question, or preparation. I guess all of these are preparation questions, but there's one big kind of dark shadow elephant in the room in the back of many people's minds when they travel to Alaska for the first time, which is bears, brown bears.
Steve knows nothing.
Yeah, Steve, you had one heck of a trip there chasing moose. Wow. First off, incredible. But what would you guys share with people about your experiences dealing with that? Again, a lot of us have had grizzly experience and encounters in the lower 48 around those parts of the country, but it's different up there in Alaska. Two specific things. Number one, would love to hear your thoughts on just how you dealt with that mentally, best practices for being safe in that degree of bear country. And then finally, everyone loves to hear opinions on bear defense, your preferred weapon, spray, whatever. Can you walk me through that?
I think obviously your first trip, you're going to be nervous. You're not familiar. Like here in Idaho, I mean, you can kind of get over the Wyoming border and have some grizzly bears, but generally where I hunt, that's not an issue. Let's see, the first caribou, moose trip, there was no bears because we were in a swamp. First caribou trip, we saw grizzly bears, but they're always in the distance. They were afraid of you. Wind's blowing that way, they run away from you. That's generally been my Alaska experience on some other caribou hunts, sheep hunts. The bears are afraid of you. You're just mindful. Always got to, I always just go for a pistol, have it ready. Admittedly, I don't think I'm like a great pistol shot or anything like that. Like I'm probably dead if something charges me, but
I forget what trip it was, but Steve, we're getting ready to hike and we're in the field and he was like, hey man, just so you know, like if a bear charges us, like I'm going to wait till it's on us, like till the last second to shoot. And I'm like, haha, okay. And he's like, no, I'm serious. I can't hit anything. So I got to wait till it's like right here. Yeah.
I thought it was our first trip to Kodiak. We've had some amazing experiences there. You're like, okay, there's giant brown bears, real scared of them. Again, they're when you talk to the guys who live up there, who hunt up there, they're all like, just be mindful of your surroundings. When you kill something, that's where probably 90% of the conflicts happen, is at that kill site where you got a carcass sitting there and a bear comes in. Like on Kodiak, there's like basically get the deer cut up and get out of there. If the instances where bad things happen is you kill the deer, maybe you hang it, or it takes a while to find it. You get there and a bear's already on it. So that's when you would definitely want to be kind of more aware of things. Just once you got an animal down, I'm pretty sure if you look at it, it's like 90% of the cases happen in those. And then, you're random stumbling into a sow with cubs or something. But I think to me, it's mostly between your ears. Like the actual danger is probably pretty low. I'm probably more afraid of going to like Wyoming and stuff like that, where those are grizzly bears that are very aggressive. They've not been hunted. They have no fear of humans. Up there in Alaska, they're afraid of you for the most part, except on our moose hunt. They could just care less. So those were big, fat, salmon-fed, happy brown bears, and they didn't really care that you were 20 feet away. So, and that was a mental. Everybody was on edge on that hunt quite a bit because it was, when we're sitting up on this hill and you're glassing this river, at any given point, you're seeing between 5 and 20 bears on the river. And you're like, we're going to go hike right through the middle of that. So there's confidence in numbers. I don't know the exact stats, but I believe if you go from one hunt, a majority of bear attacks happen when it's a single hunter. You go to 2 people, it reduces that by a significant amount. And I think if you go to 3 people, it almost goes to a 0% chance that you're going to get charged when you got 3 guys grouped together. So I do, when we're in really heavy bear country, I like to be like, hey, let's make sure we got at least 2 guys. Try not to be solo. If you got 3, it's odds are that nothing's going to happen. Yeah. Or if one guy's getting charged, you got 2 guys there with pistols that are, can help. So
yeah. What pistol did you go with as your go-to?
Mark.
That's a hot topic.
I just run a 9mm SIG with Buffalo Bore solid cast ammo. I think it's 147 grain plus P. Yeah, Mark knows this stuff better than I do. We did an episode years ago with kind of grizzly bear expert guy out of Montana. They did their study, and I think 10mm was the best, and then 9 was right behind it. And I, again, I'm not a pistol guy. I just shoot, a couple dozen rounds a year. It's like, okay, well, good enough. I'm not, but
did you guys have spray with you up there too, or just the pistol?
No, anyone we've talked to, and it makes complete sense to me. When you're dealing, it's always windy up there, so there's a 50-50 chance if the wind's blowing the wrong way. If pistol's your only defense, you're screwed.
Spray, you mean?
Spray is your only defense. Then you're SOL. From my understanding, with guys who shoot the 10mm, you're not going to get as many rounds off, and you're going to be a lot less accurate. Versus a 9, you're probably going to get more rounds off and be more accurate. And to me, I just acknowledge if I get charged, I'm probably dead. I guess that's part of the adventure.
What would you add on any of that stuff, Mark?
Just mainly to echo don't be afraid of it. I'm not saying nothing can happen, but I would, I wasn't on Steve's moose hunt. That was an exceptional amount of bears, but I have seen on almost every trip I've been to Alaska in different parts of the state, have seen bears and have never had a scary encounter, and have just observed that they want nothing to do with you either in general. So just that awareness piece to make sure you're ultimately aware of your surroundings and not spooking, surprising, just being a little bit aware, but don't be afraid. Definitely the first time I hunted Kodiak, I grew up hearing about Kodiak brown bears, and I was like, they're around every corner, and I think the density is 1 per 1 point something square miles. And I the first time I saw one on foot, it was probably we were on this hillside. We had just killed a buck, and we were looking down on this bottom, probably 600 yards away. And I was just like, oh, there's a Volkswagen or something down there. I just saw this giant mass moving, and it seriously looked like a giant vehicle. And I was like, oh, that's a big old bear. And then you do see the prints and the tracks and the scat, and it's impressive. But at the end of the day, I would much rather be in Alaska with a bunch of bears than Montana, Wyoming, etc. And then I think a sidearm is generally the way to go, and I tend to align with Steve. I've owned a couple 10mm. I like the idea of them. I don't shoot them well, and so I'm just really honest with myself. Of hey, I would rather have something more controllable, something quicker, something I can shoot better under a quick scenario, potentially one-handed, have more capacity, etc., than the ballistically optimal 10mm that is probably just got to spray everywhere, to be honest. So I go with 9mm, and then even going back to group size, that's a great thing. There's some of the trips, the mountain goat trip we did, we had 4 guys total, and only one of us had a pistol. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but I do think there's massive safety in numbers. So if it's a situation where it's hey, we truly are hunting together, there's 2, 3, 4 of us, we're not splitting apart, there is a rifle in the group, and then sure, is it smart to have a guy or 2 with a pistol? Yes. Is it overkill for everyone to have a pistol? probably, but make, the decision that makes you feel comfortable for sure.
Yeah. Continuing on with gear a little bit. I know there's 1,000 pieces of gear, and people really spend a lot of time thinking through the perfect things for these types of situations, especially an Alaskan trip where everything matters more. But I'd love to talk through a couple categories with you guys. And we can't not talk about packs. You guys are the pack guys. Can you run me through a few of the most important considerations from your perspective? And I know this depends on what you're hunting, so I guess drill in where you think appropriate. But a few thoughts on, making a good pack decision when you're going on a caribou hunt or a moose hunt or something like that in these kind of extreme conditions, tough hiking through stuff. I think that's a big thing. You might be carrying heavy loads, but then also having to crawl on all fours or falling over tussocks. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. So I certainly have experienced bad pack experiences and then very good pack experiences. No one better to ask than you guys. Can you give us a little bit of thought, a little bit something to think about there?
Yeah, I mean, if you're new to packing, if you're a whitetail hunter, you've never thrown a quarter on your back, obviously that's where a pack pays for itself, right? The comfort that it can provide, the stability it can provide, getting you out of the field, getting your meat back to camp or wherever it is that it's going to get picked up from. So you really just need to pick something that's that's comfortable for you. So something that's, I've got my criteria when I'm designing packs of, what are the necessary things it has to have. Like it has to have a hip belt that fits you, right? So we have 5 different size belts that we have on our EXO packs to make sure you get proper fit there. You want the foam wrapping around the front of the hip bones to help kind of distribute the weight. Has to have an adjustable torso, right? So get the shoulder harness dialed in. If it's like a fixed torso, it's non-negotiable. Like that's just going to be really uncomfortable. You have to have a certain amount of frame height and rigidity to that frame so the load lifters are functional with heavy loads. There's there's 10 things that are just like absolute must-haves. But at the end of the day, you just got to, packs and boots are the 2 most important things. Boots first, packs second, in our opinion, for like Western hunt, Alaska hunt, because they're in contact with your body all the time. If your feet are killing you, there's nothing that's going to shut you down. I don't care how mentally tough you are. Like when you're covered in blisters and your feet are hot, like that stops a hunt pretty quick. Pack kind of falls right behind that. Like when you just got your 20, 30 pounds, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to shut you down. But once you go kill something, it can certainly be if you've experienced it, it's going to be a limiting factor. If you've had a miserable pack out, like, we're not getting more than a mile from camp because it's going to be absolutely miserable to pack that out. Where a good pack can, take away like 90% of that.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say one specific thing. For a week-long Alaskan hunt, what size do you recommend?
The average guy, I'd say at least 5,000 cubic inches. 5 to 6,000 is probably a good range. Yeah.
One thing on that comes a lot with our customers is they'll call and say, "Hey, I'm going on even say a 10-day hunt in Alaska," right? So they think they immediately need the biggest pack because 10 days is a lot of days. And then my question always is like, where and how are you hunting? Because if you're flying in and getting dropped off at moose camp and you have 10 days to hunt, you're never carrying close to 10 days worth of stuff, right? Like in all reality, you're doing this drop camp hunt. You're probably never staying out overnight away from base camp. You could probably hunt with a day pack if you wanted to. So just don't, when you think of Alaska, you think of days of hunting. If it's a fly-in hunt or a drop camp hunt, a boat-based hunt, lodge-based hunt, whatever, like don't equate days to the biggest pack and look at your actual demands of how many days worth of stuff if I'm carrying. Like on my goat hunt, we went out for 8 days worth of stuff, super cold weather gear, needed a large pack. Caribou hunt, we were backpacking. Moose hunt, you guys were backpacking. But like say that 2019 caribou hunt we did or Kodiak stuff, like you just don't need a 10-day pack just because you're there for 10 days, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. How many days are you away from camp is your metric.
Yeah. Okay. Any little hot tips as far as packing game off the mountain or in tough terrain? I feel like it was your video. I saw you guys with your trekking poles stuck to the bottom of your pack to stabilize the antlers. That was really interesting. I'd never done that before. Do you have any other thoughts on packing heavy loads, anything like that you guys, having done this so much, might be able to share with us?
First, understand Alaska it's going to have very different regulations on depending on where you're at in the state on what the requirements are for meat. Caribou hunt is like all bone in, got to pack out the ribs, bone in. You could split it in half, but it's very different. We go over to our moose hunt. You can bone out in that area where we're moose hunting, which is just, you need to really understand that. They're very, in Idaho, it's like hindquarters, front quarters, back straps, tenderloins. I don't think you have to take neck meat anymore. Neck and rib meat, I think you can leave on an animal. So they're very, like, not super strict there. Get up to Alaska, it's very, very strict. And really understand it's certainly not a statewide policy. So that really dictates certain things. If you're, bone in, you're just gonna, eat oversized game bag so you can, put all the meat in there. Doesn't really matter. The game bag's not that important in my opinion when it's bone in, because the meat's on the bone. It's got a structure already. If you're boning out, then you need game bags that are kind of tall and skinny, in my opinion. You don't want something stretchy, because when you're putting that in the pack, the meat just turns into this big ball, this big clump of meat. It's really hard to strap down. So I always tell people, like, tall, skinny game bags that don't stretch. Imagine you're making a tube of sand that you're going to strap on the pack and do a training hike with. That's the goal. You always want meat kind of in between the shoulder blades, high and tight is what I say. Never have meat hanging or weight hanging down below the waist belt. And then also don't have it off the back of the backpack. You want as close to your back as you possibly can, kind of between the shoulder blades. Have that weight up high so it's transferring down into the hips, not hanging low. You see pretty common. You see like a guy's got elk quarter and then he puts the elk head off the very back of the pack. And that's the worst thing to do, right? Because you're just putting all that weight further away from your back. It's pulling back on you. It's got leverage. You want to put that head like on top of it. So again, like I always just envision that weight transferring down into the hips. I don't mark anything else.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Like you mentioned, Mark, on the caribou, we were taking a trekking pole. You can do it with a stick too, but and this is true for lower 48, like bigger elk. If you get that head positioned higher, like Steve was talking about, it's going to want to tend to like rotate and swing. So it might stay in a decent position, but as you move, it's like creating momentum, which is terrible. Or the way you position it with the load, it might like want to rock and get up towards your way. So yeah, just bracing it with a trekking pole, a stick, and tying that down is really helpful. And then it's really cool to shoot something big until you're like in Alaska and like in the brush and have to like get that thing through trees and you're like, I really should have shot that smaller one. So that's fun. The other thing, just this isn't pack, but gear wise, is I would say unique to Alaska is don't skimp on shelter. Like we've talked a lot, like if you're a new hunter, new to backpack hunting, and you're the guy who we talked about before is going to go from being a whitetail guy to go into Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, whatever, and elk hunt in the Rockies, like go to Walmart, like save money, do what you can, just go get experience. Don't worry about having the greatest shelter. I would say if you're going to Alaska, ignore all that stuff and like get something that's built well. I've had actual shelter failures in Alaska, 100+ miles away from civilization. So it's a real deal. So don't skimp on shelter. And then just to touch quickly on a really common question with Alaska we get a lot on gear is like down versus synthetic. Mm-hmm. And there is, like, if you look at a lot of gear lists or hear from like a lot of guides and outfitters, they're going to say you have to go synthetic everything. I really feel that that's not necessarily bad or wrong, but I feel like that's that guide and outfitter buying themselves insurance so that their hunters are not like putting themselves in a bad situation. So I would just say if you already have decent down gear and you have some experience and you understand the limitations of down and how to take care of it and protect it, don't feel like I have all this rad down stuff and now I'm going to Alaska and I have to shed it all and get synthetic. I don't think that's the case at all. Just understand a little bit about what are the limitations of down and like how to use it. Again, I've noticed the overemphasis on synthetic, which again, I'm not saying is wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't get synthetic. I just think that's guides and outfitters, wanting ill-prepared, misunderstood hunters to like have a safe option, which I get. Yeah. But yeah, if you have down stuff, don't automatically assume you can't take it to Alaska.
So just for people that maybe aren't familiar with this, the issue with down in somewhere like Alaska is the fact that it loses its insulating qualities when wet, right? And so the idea with synthetic is it can keep you warm even if you do get moisture in there. And Alaska, especially certain parts of Alaska being, notorious for weather. But that brings up another good question, which is, and actually, I reached out to you, Mark, about this last year, which is what are some ways to keep my stuff dry in a place like Alaska? I was hunting in Southeast Alaska last year and thinking, all right, how am I going to manage to keep all this stuff dry? What are the different layers of dry bags or different tools I can bring along with me to make sure I'm not soaking wet and cold up on top of a mountain? Can you walk us through anything you guys use to manage moisture and rain and inclement weather to keep your stuff usable, dry, and warm?
Yeah, dry bags for me. Let's just be very careful about that. We have a dry bag system that works with our packs, where it's like a dry bag that just drops in and turns the entire pack into a dry bag. And I just always have everything in there that needs to stay dry is in the dry bag. So it's extra clothes, sleeping bag, shelter is in or out, depending. If you wake up in the morning, it's covered in frost, I'm not going to throw it in there. Just going to leave that shell. I'm kind of put in an outside pocket. But that's kind of your ultimate insurance. We don't rely on a rain cover. It's going to be kind of pointless. We want like everything in dry bags. When we got lucky on the very first caribou trip up there. Something I never do. I leave base camp and just you got your pad and your sleeping bag all set up and good to go. Oh, we were out hunting and all of a sudden the winds kicked up and we got back and our tent was laid over and luckily everything wasn't scattered across the tundra. But ever since then, it's like if I'm leaving the tent, I'm packing up my stuff in the morning. I'm going to throw all my clothes and everything in a bag and kind of make sure it's at least pretty heavy. That if there's there's been times where I literally put a rock inside the dry bag to add weight to it so it didn't blow away. Just in that kind of, you just need to be, you got to treat your shelter like it's it is your lifeline out there, right? You got to treat it completely different than I would if I was in the lower 48 where, I guess I've been backpacking for so long down here where it's just like something terrible happens. I'm never more than 4 hours from my truck. Even if I got to hike to the middle of the night, it's not a big deal. Up there, it's not an option. So you really want to make sure you're dialed and taking care of stuff. And it's just a lot of just being proactive, right? Instead of reactive. Like, okay, if something's soaking wet, I'm not just going to throw it in my pack and leave it in my pack all day. If the sun happens to come out, I'm going to lay everything out and let it dry out in the sun before, because you just never know when that next storm's going to come. So just maintaining things, keeping them dry as you go. So it's not just kind of this progressive, it's wet, you pack it away wet and and then all of a sudden you don't pull it out until later that night and it's wet in your sleeping bag. You add condensation in the morning and kind of a domino effect there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That reminds me of just like planning for like weather contingencies and planning for success. Steve and I are both like pretty minimalist guys. We're just backpack hunting. So it's like we want as little as possible, essentially. There's definitely situations in Alaska where you think through like things you might need. And that could be an extra tarp, that could be extra rope. And just especially on like a hunt where you are doing a drop camp, like say this caribou, you guys are going to go do your first drop camp caribou hunt. There's a group of you, there's 4 of you. You kill a caribou on day 1 or 2, but you still have 5, 6, 7 days in the field. Like, what are you actually doing with that meat the whole time? Having a tarp, trying to keep it dry. Another advantage to like putting a tarp over meat is not only keeping it dry and keeping it shade, but usually it's going to be windy. And I really feel that like that noise in the wind of that tarp flying can keep like bears away from the meat, for example. So just thinking through things like that, I would just, again, if there's a case for, hey, I'm doing a 10-day backpack sheep hunt, I have to be as minimal as possible, for sure. I'm not saying go overboard and bring the kitchen sink, but I would have like, hey, what do we need an extra shelter? Or like maybe, a bigger shelter than we thought because we could have to sit this out for 48 hours literally in a shelter versus being crammed in a one-man tent, or having a tarp for a place to store gear, maybe some extra rope, some extra guy. Like some of that extras, like we always say that people tend to pack their fears, and we're usually preaching against that. Like, you don't need all this extra stuff. Don't pack all the fears and all the contingencies and what ifs. At the same time with Alaska, I would think through like, okay, if you truly are remote and you're 100+ miles away and that plane's not coming to get you, like you are on your own essentially. So again, don't be afraid, but like just think through some of those things of like, how are we going to handle XY problem, right? Again, not being like paranoid scared, but just making sure you have your bases covered.
Yeah, that's important. One more water-related question. You mentioned how, in your opinion, Steve, it's pack and boots that are the very most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Boots are a big. I guess there's questions around boots and handling wetness and moisture too, especially there.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a friend who I was hunting with this past fall, and he's an Alaska resident, and he does all of his hunting everywhere in Alaska, from the Brooks Range to Southeast in extra toughs, in knee-high extra toughs. And so he was telling me that's what you got to get. Just take your extra toughs. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, not hiking boots. What is your guys' take on boots in general for these kinds of trips, but then also managing moisture, crossing creeks, boggy swamps, fording rivers, all that kind of stuff, and maybe not just boots, but boots plus supplemental footwear.
Yeah, I was saying Crocs are your friend, man. Like we use Crocs a lot up there. It's something that I don't very rarely pack down here. Up here, I've always taken Crocs with me because then you just put them all on cross streams. We did a sheep pack out once, like 15 miles. We did the entire thing in Crocs because we were knee deep to waist deep, walking down rivers, crossing the river, and it was way. We hiked in boots, and you're just you spend so much time and effort taking the boot out, crossing the stream, putting it back on, trying to jump across the stream, trying to find a path, trying to find it like a dangerous, like, oh, there's a log. I'm going to try to you slap the Crocs on, walk right down the middle of the stream. It's pretty awesome, and you're getting like an ice bath the whole way. It's like pretty fantastic. Yeah. Boots are part of the experience project. We did a bunch of gear, kind of dove into like top 12 gear items, and I did a boot one. I think I talked for at least an hour on my philosophies, and I'm a little bit bucking the trend of the hunting like stiff leather boots. For me they don't work. There's a lot of downsides and drawbacks to them. So if someone wants to like really kind of take a deep dive into boots, I'd suggest watching that video because there's a lot of just within a boot adjusting. First of all, take the stock insole that comes with it, throw it in the trash, go buy an aftermarket quality one. The performance across the board is going to be better. Understanding socks and how you can adjust the sock thickness to kind of custom tailor the size of the boot. There's a lot of things you can do. And you really you have to get your boots and break them in and try them out before a hunt because you're going to find out what works and what doesn't. And get to buy a pair of boots and like hike around your neighborhood. No, like you got to go get like off trail, side hill, downhill to find all those things. And again, that's like number one thing that's going to shut you down from a hunt. I generally like synthetic boots. I haven't found. I literally try 5 to 10 pairs of boots a year. I have yet to find one that's like, this is the boot that I'm going to wear. This is the perfect one. They've all got drawbacks. Synthetics generally aren't going to be as durable. What I like about them is they're going to dry out. So you get up in Alaska, you get a leather boot, super soggy, wet. It's going to take, even if the sun comes out, it's going to take days to dry that thing out, where synthetic can dry out in hours. So that's my general preference. Everyone's different. Like I said, I don't have a perfect answer other than have Crocs and use the crap out of those things.
Yeah. I think it's an important like caveat to what we talked about earlier. Alaska can be so different. So it's understanding what am I heading into? Am I going into, tundra in the Brooks Range? Am I going to an interior moose swamp like Steve talked about? Am I going to Southeast Alaska? Am I going to Kodiak? I think if you had a good boot, you can kind of take a boot on almost anything. I think it's the supplementary stuff that's like, do I need Crocs? Do I need hip waders? Do I need chest waders? It's that extra stuff of swampiness, water crossings, and all that. People play up, you get in, especially like the mountain Alaska hunts, like sheep hunts, goat hunts, whatever. And obviously most of the advice there is, you have to have like something like super hardcore stiff as possible. If that works for you, that's fantastic. I just don't think that's default advice that you have to follow. I mean, I've done goat hunts and sheep hunts in a moderate, like if you had like I think some of the companies use like 1 to 5 on flex. Like I use a 2.5 to 3 essentially on like the most steep, tough terrain there is. So it's at the end of the day, it's a situation of 1, understand what you're heading into, and then 2, find what works for you. Don't listen to people. because all of our feet are so different. I mean, there's certain things you can understand. Like if you know you have a narrow foot, some of these European brands like La Sportiva and et cetera, like kind of fit that well. If you know you have a wide foot, you know, you're going to have to go to a different boot manufacturer. You can, and we talked about this like in your video, Steve, but like there's the last of the boot, which is essentially the shape of the footbed of the boot. And even doing simple stuff like take that insole out of the boot, like Steve talked about, before you throw it away. But like literally just take the insole out first. Like if you got 3-4 pairs of boots, take all the insoles out and like step on those. And you're essentially looking at the inside shape of the boot because you're looking at the insole and going, hey, like one of these is going to look like it fits my foot better and one's not, right? So just little stuff like that. So boots are the most important thing in all of like whether Alaska hunting or we're elk hunting or anything where it's like you covering ground, like boots are the most important thing. It's also the most annoying thing, right? Like sometimes it takes years and a ton of money and trying stuff on to figure out what works for you. And then sometimes you do that and you find the boot and then like a year and a half later, you realize the manufacturer changed it, discontinued it, did whatever. So like for me, I just bought a 4th pair of boots that have done everything for me. And they happened to be on sale. I literally saw them yesterday. I was like, 4th pair, let's go. You know, because I know like I could just for the next 10 years, I could pretty much go do anything anywhere in that pair of boots. And like I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's never gave me a problem, you know?
Yeah.
I think one of the advice I get, like, don't assume your feet have to be uncomfortable. I in my opinion, you should have comfortable feet no matter what you're hunting, where you're hunting. So if you're having uncomfortable feet, start address it. Whether it's the boot's too stiff or it's not, you know, there's too much flex or there's too much room inside the foot, so your foot's sliding around getting hot, or you got heel lift or something like that. Like, just keep tweaking that until, you know, your feet should never kill you. A good tip is like you get back to camp, the very first thing you want to do is like, oh, my feet are killing me. I need to take these boots off. Like that's a good sign to me that, I mean, there's obviously like the bigger ones, like full blisters and your feet are really tore up. But if that's the first thing you want to do when you get back to camp, like keep looking, keep tweaking. There's a combination of boot, sock, insole out there that that's going to allow you to have very comfortable feet. We have, very, like, I don't have feet issues anymore, right? Like they're just comfortable, good to go. But I'm doing that caribou hunt in like basically a mid trail running shoe. And that's what works for me. But that's just my experience. Yeah. But it's not you. That's another bit of advice. Like you can ask somebody what is a good durable boot, what's a waterproof boot. But as far as someone saying, oh, this boot's comfortable, I think it's like, that's completely irrelevant. Everyone's different.
So personal.
So it's like, if you're on social media or whatever, or a forum, like ask like, what have you had good experience with from waterproof? What have you had good experience with from durability? And that's where it stops. Like the rest of that's just so up to your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last fast comfort related question, which would be your comfort with your experience pack rafting. Saw you guys using pack rafts there on the caribou hunt. Epic float out there. Saw you guys pushing them across there on your moose hunt. I've used them a little bit and have thought about a number of trips in Alaska using those. What were your thoughts on how it handled the job you guys were trying to put it through? A lot of weight, kind of a little bit western there with the rising waters and everything. What was your quick take on that?
They're incredible. They're brand new to us. I've never done one before the caribou trip. Mark hadn't either. I've got a decent amount of river rafting experience here in Idaho. Mark had like next to zero, so he came out.
I'm just glad to be here.
We did a golf tournament last summer that EXO sponsored. We put on ourselves, and when Mark was out here for that, we're like, hey, there's a creek that I knew we could go float, and so we literally went and bought dog food, about like 80 pounds for each boat. Threw them in the tubes and went and floated this creek just to get some kind of, I mean, to me, it's just like, just had to have some base to like go off of. And they did beautifully. So we got confidence. And then, on the caribou trip, the waters, it was like record high flooding that came through, like higher than spring runoff. And we had to wait for it to go down. And we were all nervous as hell because we had a couple sharp S turns coming up and just like, well, full send, let's see what happens. And they were awesome. They did absolutely fantastic. We had the Alpaca Rangers and one, I think it's called Forager boat from Alpaca. And put all the meat, all the gear, everything in there. The only thing on top of the raft was strap the antlers and plop your body down inside of it. And they were incredible. To me, it's like opened my eyes. Or what else? Like, what can I do here in Idaho? Where can I start utilizing this more?
Yeah.
Access some country that I didn't think was possible. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Any thoughts from you, Mark?
No, I'm just so glad to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, I was like moderately nervous about doing it in general, not like afraid, but then if you watch the video, we had this giant, like Steve said, just way unexpected river conditions that went crazy. And just as we were loading up for that, it was like, I loved it. I even loved it in the moment, but it was like a little unnerving to be like, I don't know what's around the corner. Like, we had been sitting there watching this river and just full on trees and like everything go down. It's like, what's around the corner? Is it going to be a big sweeper? And are you caught? And I'm like, we have everything in the tubes of these pack rafts, like all the meat, all of our gear, all of our everything. So you're literally making these decisions of like, okay, inside my zippered chest waders pocket, I have my inReach. I have a lighter, like I have a little bit of food because, maybe those three guys get past and I get swept up and then I'm soaked and I'm bailing off, so it's just like thinking through all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like, it was one of the coolest things I've ever done. Like those moments, and I don't remember what I told you, Steve, but like those moments where you're doing something so amazing, like you almost just want to like scream, like at the top of your lungs, like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, we're just floating down, four of us floating down this river in the Alaska mountains, and just like caribou antlers bebopping. You're getting splashed from the waves. Like,
yeah.
I think I told Steve, like, I knew this was going to be awesome, but this is like exceeded every expectation of everything. They're so cool. And to your point, I'm very inexperienced. I have no idea what I'm doing. And even loading, we had 4 guys, 4 rafts, 4 caribou. So all of us are loaded with 4 full caribou, all that meat, all of our gear, all of the everything. And those rafts just like ate it up. Like, it was impressive. Really impressive.
That first 3 miles, it's a narrow river, and you're at times like in the trough of the wave in those rafts, like full on waters over your head, come and crash into your chest, and they just like, it was incredible. Yeah. We weren't running the cameras at all during that, so you don't see it, unfortunately, but it was freaking awesome. Yeah.
Quite the trip.
Yeah.
Well, we opened this conversation with a question of why Alaska, and I want to end it a little bit more zoomed out and just ask you both, why adventure? You both said that's really important in your lives.
Yeah.
Why? Why would you say, Steve?
Well, you feel alive. Like we talk about this a lot. Is like everything in our life right now is about making things more comfortable. Let's make this easier to do. Let's be more comfortable. Let's never get too hot. Let's never get too cold. It just kind of like numbs you to everything. And so it's like when you go out there, you just feel, I don't know, you just feel alive. Like the bear hunt, the moose with all the bears. All the guys, we were like, when we left that, we're like, nope, never again. And everybody's like, there was something there. Like, can we go back again? Like, it sounds crazy, but when you're just out there surviving, you're experiencing it. You're not thinking about, some email or text or trying to it's just everything's gone. You're just focused on the moment in front of you. I think it's just so rare these days, where we're just got so much being thrown at us from so many different angles, and balancing work, family, and just social media or whatever the heck. It's just the second I'm out of there, I think that's one thing that I do. We talk about is it's that sometimes you're miserable, but you just got to like take your mind out of that moment. If I say you're stuck in the tent, like within a week of being home, you're going to wish you were back in that tent. So it's like, it's one of those little mental things to do. Like, okay, this sucks, but it's also amazing at the same time. So just take it, like put a smile on your face. How lucky are we? Like, we're in Alaska, we're stuck in a tent. It's 50-mile-an-hour winds and raining sideways, but like, there's kind of, obviously my family's number one thing in my life, but as far as like, that's a pretty awesome experience. So just enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark?
Ditto to everything. Yeah, Steve said. I mean, at this point, I think at this point for me, it feels like a disservice not to keep doing adventure, simply because like I know what it means to me. I also feel like it makes me a better person for when I am home. Like it feeds my soul. It, like it re-energizes me. and I don't even know how to say this without sounding like really cheesy or corny, but I feel like it would be, because I have the capability to do it, like even physically, I feel like it would be a big waste not to do it. Like there's not just these giant trips, but like just little stuff. Like I've just, man, like to take health for granted, to take capabilities for granted. And um, I mean, it's a sacrifice to like go do this stuff, like even on my family, like time away. But again, I feel like it makes me better for when I am home. And anymore, it's just like, man, if I can physically go do something, and again, it doesn't have to be Alaska, but it could be like hiking the Grand Canyon. It could be, a random elk hunt. It could be hunting deer, like in this more adventurous way, like you've been talking about in the series. If you can do it, do it. Because there's going to come a day where you can't. Like,
Yeah.
there is, So for me, it's just, I'm trying to balance that with like work and family and everything else, but like you have to choose to make it, I don't even want to say priority. Like you have to choose to make it happen. If you don't, like you may find yourself one day wishing you could, but you no longer can, essentially.
Yeah. Life will just pass you by if you let it.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, you guys have done a heck of a job documenting the trips we've been talking about, the equipment you use, tactics, planning, like in so much more detail than we've done here today. Can you guys point towards where they can get all your content, and then of course where they can learn about the packs and anything else you want to tell people about?
Mark?
So we have EXO Mtn Gear, which is the pack company. And then as we've talked about, this idea of the experience project is kind of what all these Alaska hunts we just talked about. We launched the experience project last year. We talked before the trips about like our planning process and like the boot videos and shooting stuff, all kinds of stuff. And then each of those 3 trips, the caribou, the moose, mountain goat, they're all filmed. So there's a whole video series out. You can find everything on the EXO YouTube channel, and then there's a separate website. It's the-experience-project.com that has like blog articles, podcasts, videos, a bunch of stuff. And then at the end of the day, we're also super easy to get a hold of. So if people have questions, let us know. That could be us replying and answering your question directly, or there's been times where people have emailed something or like, that's a great question, we should do a podcast about it or a video about it or whatever. So just feel free to shoot us an email as well. Just go to EXO and go to contact. But there's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, I'll vouch for it. Everything I've watched and listened to has been awesome so far. And I used one of your packs on my Southeast Alaska hunt this past fall. It was incredible. I've used your packs on elk hunts, and I've used other people's packs on elk hunts, and I was miserable in some of those other packs and always very, very happy in yours. So thanks for putting out really good content, really good equipment, and thanks for chatting about all this today. You got me fired up.
Thanks for having us on.
All right, now as promised, we're going to do a quick part 2. We're going to join my friend Bjorn Dila to discuss some of the current threats and issues impacting Alaska, things that you and I need to be paying attention to over the coming years to make sure that Alaska is, kept healthy and thriving and public and all the things that we need to make sure we can experience something like what Mark and Steve just told us about. So real quick, here's my chat with Bjorn. All right, Bjorn, thank you for hopping on here today for this quick kind of mini addendum addressing the future of Alaska, because we just had this great conversation with Mark and Steve about planning an Alaskan adventure. But I thought it would be appropriate that while we're thinking about someday going to Alaska right now, we should also be thinking about the things influencing the future of this incredible state. So you being a lifelong resident, diehard hunter, and someone who cares about this place a lot, you seem to be the perfect person to help us with that. So there's a lot going on right now, Bjorn. What for you stands out as a couple of the very most important issues that hunters and anglers need to be aware of up there in Alaska right now? What's at the top of the list for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, as you just said, going on, and a whole lot of chaos, and we're not sure, where everything is going to stand when the dust clears, and what to really even expect. But we can basically expect that we're going to need to stay vigilant and just well aware as hunter and anglers of what's going on and staying cued in. You could start at the top of Alaska. You can just kind of go down uh, by strata
Yeah.
and look at all the different things going on, and some of the things that are grabbing the news the most um don't concern me as much as a few issues, and those issues that concern me, in part it's personal. It's what I kind of recognize as the biggest threats, I feel like, to just the hunting and fishing community. And there's Anwar, and Anwar is just one of those kind of nebulous battles that have been going on forever. And we could talk about Anwar, but ultimately it doesn't really concern me in the same way as what's going on just a little bit further west and a little bit further south, and that's the proposed Ambler Road.
So real quick,
Anwar.
I want to interrupt you real quick before you go to Ambler. Just so people know, ANWR is an acronym for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And so what's been proposed up there is possible drilling in a portion of the refuge. That's one of the things that has been debated for years and was included in this recent executive order. But okay, so that is one thing that folks can keep tabs on. But you're saying go a little farther west, a little bit south to the Ambler Road.
Yeah. Anwar is always it's just been this big it's like an argument over an idea as much of something practical. And there's just been so much energy put into both sides of that argument. And the reality is that, it's very likely that it's not even viable, so it's not something that, like, at this moment, the drilling's not viable. It's just not going to happen. Like, if there was drilling, it might just be done out of spite versus something that's economically feasible. So for me, I try to pay attention a little bit what's going on there, but a little bit south, a little bit further west is the proposed Ambler Road, 211-mile road that'd be constructed with taxpayers' dollars to service an unknown number of foreign-owned mines. And I think that's really important to just understand that this is our taxpayers' money, and these are foreign-owned mines. And the Brooks Range, for anyone who's been there, it is kind of just the ultimate. It changes your perspective. It can change your life. It can take someone who is just super cynical and make them a believer. I could go on and on. It's one of the most amazing, if not the most amazing, gem of our public land in this country. It's the biggest, wildest piece of country left in America. And so this road would, it's not just a road too. There's going to be spur roads off every which direction. And basically the road would supposedly end 211 miles west of the Dalton Highway, but there's really no reason not just to extend it all the way to the Chukchi Sea and then down to Nome, to Kotzebue, a little north of Kotzebue, then to the Nome road system. So basically, talking to some people, it's just like it's the final nail in the coffin of North America's epic wilderness, basically. And so for us, for hunters and anglers, we have everything to lose and nothing to gain from this project. It's supposed to be a private road. It's not going to be open to the public. That might change 30 years down the road, but it's just pretty much guaranteed. All the environmental impact statement from the last administration made it very clear that it was going to negatively affect 66 villages that rely on food out there, fish and game. It's going to negatively affect caribou and other species. And so there's been a lot of arguments, there's been a lot of propaganda. And I think it's key to understand that these are foreign-owned mines. It's also key to understand that these minerals are not staying in our country, and that's really important. It's like these minerals are going to be shipped to be refined, at least most of them, if not all of them, that are understanding at this point, to Asian refineries. They're going to enter Asian markets. There's no guarantees these minerals are going to be sold back. So essentially, it's like, it's I'm not going to call it a, robbery, but it's also an opportunity, though. It's, this would be a great opportunity for President Trump to be like, just say, no, I'm not going to allow these minerals to go to a foreign-owned mining company, to foreign markets. And so I think it's a great opportunity. And I'm hopeful that, a lot of these executive orders just kind of, I don't know if it's a lot of bark. You just want to stir the pot as much as possible. And then, build back up, or is it just to burn everything down? I don't know, but it is a great opportunity for Trump, and, to stand up and be like, look, this is not American. This is not the right thing to do. This hurts Americans. This hurts our outdoor legacy. Let's say no to the Ambler Road.
Yeah. And so to provide just a little bit more background, this has been a thing that's been debated for a handful of years now. And then this last summer, the BLM basically came out and said, we are not going to permit the road. The road's not going to happen. So after a bunch of hunters and anglers and many other folks submitted comments and sent emails, made phone calls, all that kind of stuff. Like I know through the hunters and anglers for the Brooks Range campaign, I think like thousands of comments were sent in. I think I remember seeing many thousands. So hunters and anglers have fought this issue already. We thought we had it taken care of, and
nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, nonpartisan, exactly. And so the unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential executive order, I think that's what it was called. It specifically called that out as something they want to put back on the table, possibly, right? So that's why this is back on the radar. And to your point, big opportunity for hunters and anglers to once again stand up and say, hey, not the right place, not the right mine. The administration last time around, there's precedent for them saying no to some stuff because they did say no to the Pebble mine, right? So why not do it again with this one? This is, like you said, this is an opportunity to show support for hunters, anglers, and the wild places we care about, right?
Yeah, I mean, Don Jr., big thanks to him for saying no to, saying yes to Bristol Bay, no to Pebble. And I mean, I think, again, just as someone who is a hunter and fisherman, once that goes in, we kind of lose out. We lose,
Yeah.
So.
Because to your point too, there's, at least I've heard, like you said, rumblings of 211 miles in, but why not connect it to the Red Dog mine area too, right? Which is there to the northwest further. And if you had a full road that bifurcates that whole, western Alaska region, you then have carved out a whole new line of potential travel and development. And like you said, the Western Arctic caribou herd has dropped by more than 50%. I think I saw in the last 20 years. And
there's been more than that.
Yeah. Studies have shown them bumping up against that Red Dog mine road and turning around and not wanting to cross it. So there seems to be a lot of red flags on this one.
Yeah. I mean, the locals are going to lose out. The village folks out there, the visiting sportsmen are going to lose out. I mean, if I was a developer, there's no way that I wouldn't be pushing to extend that road. And there's just, there's other stuff to extract out there. And then I think the other thing to remember too, it's not just a 211-mile road. There's going to be spur roads going off every which direction, north and south to whatever, so.
And it's, I don't think people are realizing this either. It's not like this is just a random blank spots on the map. This is also a national park that they're putting part of this road through too, right? So that's pretty wild that they're going to put a new road through Gates to the Arctic, and then through a bunch of BLM land, and who knows what else.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's lawyers argue whether or not the legality of whether or not that's legal, and they both have their points, so it's just kind of this weird. Gates of the Arctic is a weird one as far as the road going through, but yeah.
So Ambler, that's a big one. Anwar is one that's tricky and been long debated, but another special place. Is there any other third or fourth thing that we should be keeping tabs on? What else is high on your list?
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on, and I think we can put some links so people can kind of stay abreast of what's going on. But the issues with salmon that we got going on, like there's not fish in the Yukon, Kuskokwim rivers, the two biggest rivers in Alaska. People cannot catch salmon anymore. So I think like that's a huge, the future of wild salmon is a huge issue that I think as hunters and anglers we should stay well aware of. And there's a variety of factors going into that, which I won't go into, but I just think that, we got to be thinking about the future of salmon. And a big one that's kind of new and tricky too is an access road to get in the West Susitna region, which is just north of Anchorage. It's a 100-mile road. It's not, granted, I've spent 6 months in the Brooks Range over the years, had all sorts of experiences. I don't have that same relationship with that zone. I don't think the pull is quite as strong with hunters and anglers there, but it's definitely something to think about. It's a very similar situation where taxpayer dollars are going to fill the road for private enterprise, and very likely, I don't know what the status is where those minerals are going or the mines involved, but it's very likely foreign owned. And so, yeah, I think that's a big one. The salmon stuff too, going down to my neck of the woods, the transboundary issues with mines in Canada, upriver of our biggest salmon producing rivers, the Taku, the Stikine and the Unic. That's a big, tricky, hard issue. And it's definitely one that, people in Southeast Alaska are really worried about. But the biggest issue, if I had to say two issues to really think about for hunters and anglers, and this is also just selfishly my biggest things, is it's Ambler, and then it's the future of the Tongass. One of the part of Trump's executive order was to do away with the roadless rule, and it's hard to exactly know what he means by bringing logging, more logging. And people in Southeast Alaska aren't against logging, even the people who really want to keep the roadless rule. So the roadless rule, essentially, it protects 58 million acres of roadless, whatever you want to call it, woods across the United States. It's one of the few things that can really be used to protect clear-cutting old growth forests. And in Southeast Alaska, it's different than in Washington, where our rotation cycle is so much longer, and there's just been a lot of habitat and wildlife issues because of past logging practices, just massive clear cuts. But no one in Southeast, unless you're completely an anomaly, is against logging. But we just don't want to go back to all of a sudden not having protections of our last great stands of old growth forest and have them clear cut for pulp. I think, a lot of people would like to see a very viable timber industry, but we just want to focus on, wildlife restoration work being done. Not every tree being cut down, more selective logging, and then, more of a focus on second growth logging and stuff like that. And so, when I hear that, in part of the executive order, getting rid of the roadless rule, it's just, you kind of have this PTSD from what happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s here, where just, in some of these zones, people kind of almost lost their ability to hunt. Like where I hunt, I can shoot 6 deer a year. And then, like unit 3, they didn't, just in large part because of massive winters, big clear cuts, coupled with lots of wolves and black bear predation. It was hardly a deer season for decades. So,
wow.
We just don't want to go back to that.
And I think I saw 9 million acres of the Tongass National Forest would lose those roadless rule protections. So
Yeah.
that's a vast swath of that area around you that right now is still pretty darn wild, pretty darn, as it was, that could all of a sudden be, opened up in a lot of ways and picked apart and cut down. And, the little bit I got to see of it is pretty damn special. I'd hate to see those last few roadless spots we've got, lost, because we're not getting any more after that.
Yeah. And, I think, and I guess the monument stuff too, just the talk of, going back to reassessing monuments, and, the place you saw was a national monument, and the battle to make that place a national monument was epic. The plan was to completely clear cut it and road it. And it was just a tooth and nail fight between a lot of different people to keep it, how we want it. So,
yeah. So, okay. So we've got Anwar's going on, Ambler Road, really big deal. The roadless road protections on the Tongass National Forest, really big deal. We've got to keep tabs on this National Monument Review. We've got to keep tabs on the salmon situation. That's a lot.
yeah.
Where or how can people, number one, tap into future information about this stuff? And then number two, are there any resources you'd recommend for people to, start letting our voices be heard on these things, or connect or engage in any kind of way?
Yeah. So, I'm just going to talk on Ambler. Join Hunters and Anglers for the Brooks Range. Sign up for their newsletter, and just get updates there, and comment when you get a chance. And then anything related to salmon and the Tongass, Salmon State does a great weekly newsletter, which is some of the best news that you'll have for different salmon related stuff. And they're working on the West of Sitna too, but I think it's just a lot of good information that's condensed in a way that you can sit down Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and spend 10 minutes instead of scrolling all over, the news and getting lost in all the doom. And just kind of keeps you educated on what's going on for big conservation issues, and will give, and also, point you in the right direction to comment or get involved if you want. So
perfect. Well, Bjorn, I appreciate the quick rundown of this stuff. I appreciate you up there in the last best place, fighting the good fight, and helping keep that incredible state you've got there in good health, so that folks like me down here can dream of it and hopefully sometime get up there and experience it ourselves. I, as I have mentioned already earlier in this episode with the other guys and on my own, my experiences in Alaska have been so impactful, so powerful, so special. And I'm hoping and praying and willing to do a lot of hard work to make sure that my kids have that same chance, and your kids, and hopefully many more generations to come. So thank you for helping us do all that stuff.
You hit the nail on the head. I think, it's not just you or me, it's all us outdoor men and women, hunters, or whatever, dreamers, whatever. You need to have a place like Alaska where you can have these experiences. And without these experiences, it's just like, what are you going to do? So yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. And that is going to be a wrap. Thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been a terrific conversation, both with Steve and Mark from EXO, as well as Bjorn here at the end. I am inspired, I am excited, and I'm better prepared for my next Alaskan trip. I hope you are too. So until then, thank you for being here, and stay wired to hunt.